Don't worry about it because we are underway. What's up, everybody? And welcome back to episode 187 of the Designated Players podcast. We're out here, we're talking as we did before about what just went wrong for some of these teams who did not make the MLS Cup playoffs. Last Monday, we did the Eastern Conference, and this week we are doing the Western Conference. So that is LA Galaxy, that is Colorado Rapids, and that is Austin FC. It is kind of similar song and dance, but not always similar. So a little bit of similarities, a little bit of differences, but we're going to go in and we're each going to give our three main reasons we think the team missed the playoffs this year. And we're going to talk about it and maybe add some points on why or how they can fix it. So, Connor, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great because we're not talking about Atlanta. So I'm doing
Yeah.
fantastic. I can't
Yeah.
wait for the Red Bull episode coming up soon.
Oh no, haven't you heard? If by some I'm not going to say miracle, whatever the anti-miracle is, that Red Bull don't make the playoffs, this series is canceled. So,
I don't know if it works like that. I'll do a solo series.
sorry, I don't know if I've told you this, but it's my podcast. I'm in charge.
I also don't know if we have enough time in the budget for you to be ranting about Red Bull missing the playoffs. So that's
Also
fair.
fair. Also fair. You know what we do have time for?
Of course I do. Why do you even pause?
Because I was hoping you would say, "Wow, that transition was sick," because it
It
was
was
a
all right.
sick. It was a
It was
sick
okay.
transition. Scarf of the week, as we do 187 times in a row. Connor, what are you rocking today?
I do not have a scarf for one of the teams we're talking about today. So I'm using it as a reason to bring out one of the scarves I paid like 30 something dollars for. I've got the Sounders scarf that I got at the Sounders game.
That's hot.
The Here's the other side. You can get the full picture. It's a nice one, of course.
Yeah, very nice.
Spent the amount of money on it. I would hope it would be nice.
I notice how you are following suit when I show off something I got at a stadium. The next episode, you show off something you got at a stadium. Very nice.
Yeah, it's
I my
inspirational.
Yeah, I know that's what I am. I just inspire people like that, you know. I am showing off a gift from a very good friend of mine who I'm sure is watching or listening. Um, who knows I'm a scarf collector, and we she got me into watching Ted Lasso. So breaking out the AFC Richmond scarf because
Oh, nice.
I too do not have same on both sides, but yeah, got a little badge there all the way across into the end there. So super nice. The quality is great. I love the scarf. But I only have one scarf that pertains to these two teams, and I it's a history scarf. It's a '96 Rapid scarf, and I saved that for MLS history. So um, we mixed it up a little bit. We brought out the AFC Richmond, who, as we know, were relegated. Spoiler alerts in the second season or the third or the end of the first season, whatever it is. They got relegated at one point. So talk about not doing enough to do what they had to do. Awful.
You know, you're supposed to say spoiler alert before you spoil it, not after you say it.
I didn't ask, nor do I care.
All right, well, that's good. It's a cool scarf. Didn't realize they made scarves for them, but I guess that also is not too surprising. But it's
Yeah, they
cool.
made they made everything. Yeah, no, I'm really really happy with it. I saw it as in the little gift bag, and I was like, oh, that's super sick. Um, so it goes up on the wall. Its spot is right there on the end. Oh, just kidding. There it is, right there on the end. Uh, it's the first one up there. It's a great little scarf to start things off. So, um, if we're talking about starting things off, probably should go to one of the worst teams in the league this year, and that would be our friends in Colorado.
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 I don't like that.
Colorado Rapides.
No. Definitely don't like that.
Canceled. Um, so my first one, and it's kind of an I'm gonna say an obvious one, but I'm gonna just lump a bunch of things together and blame it on lazy owners. We've seen all season long that Stan Kroenke is one of the wealthiest owners in the entire league, and he's done absolutely zero investment in the Rapids. Since 2021, he has spent more than $1 million on a player to add to the Rapids exactly twice. One of those was a goalkeeper, the other was Kevin Cabral. Take of that what you will. When other teams around the league are spending and you aren't, you either have to have really good intra league moves to keep up or have a really good academy. Colorado have neither or have really yet to make use of either. So Gutman was a good addition, but outside of him, the intra league moves were just kind of mid. They have developed a few decent players from the academy, but they were either moved on too quickly and never given a shot, or they haven't really panned out, like Markinich to St. Louis, for example. They've been poor in transfer windows for years, and it's coming back to bite them. On top of that, he doesn't invest in team facilities either. So at the end of May, the Inside Rapids on Twitter broke news that the league is heavily encouraging or even mandating improvements to training facilities at Dick's Sporting Good Park. The facilities were so bad that players had to file grievances with the MLS Players Association to get it looked at by the league. Rapids were only one of 3 teams not to have a dedicated training facility. And since this whole thing has come out, they have made an announcement that they're planning on updating fields and conditions and all these things now. But if it took the league stepping in to make it happen, that's not a great look. Zero drive from there. Like I mentioned, there was a statement from the Kroenke family about all these plans to improve over the next few years. But if the league has to step in, you're setting yourself up for failure by just not putting in the resources to do it. Like I said, Red Bull are very similar in this sense, but they do have the academy to at least hold them close. These guys don't have that, and it's hurting them each and every year. So this time, I think that's one of the big things that got them this year.
That'll be something every year for Colorado. I feel like probably forever. Uh, I feel like the frustrating thing for Rapids fans, at least, I mean, not to speak on their behalf, but it's not like he doesn't spend with Arsenal. I mean, maybe in the past, but I mean, he just dropped what 75 million euros on Kai Havertz. I'm sure he can find the budget for like a $5 million transfer of some up and coming South American player. I'm sure he can find it in the budget. My first point is on a pretty similar note, I would say. So, similar to my point with DC, I think this team is in sore need of some star players. And to the exact point that you were just talking about, this organization refuses to spend money to get them. I think the TAM, GAM, whatever you want to call it, core of the team is very solid. And I think the team is maybe 1 or 2 star players away from being a legitimate threat in the league. I think currently the 3 designated player spots are being used on Cabral, Maxo, and Navarro. I think Cabral needs to be off a DP contract like yesterday. Maxo, I think if you can, you try to buy him down. And then I think Navarro, you just give more time. It's been a short time in the league so far, so needs more time to kind of adjust to things. I think if you can bring in a baller attacking mid or winger, I think the team would be much more in the playoff chase than they are now. Um, and I was doing a little research looking into the history of designated players. And did you know that Colorado has only had 10 designated players in their history? And this would be fine if it was the same DPs who have continuously had success. But that's not the case. It's a lot of designated players who have been around for 1 or 2 years and then they dip and they're gone. Atlanta United began as a franchise in 2017 and already has had more designated players than Colorado. And Colorado has been around since 1996. And I know designated player rule wasn't around the entire time, but Colorado's been around the entire time and has had a jump start on plenty of other teams who are catching up or have already passed them in total number of designated players signed. It is unacceptable in MLS 4.0 to not be utilizing your designated player spots more often than Colorado has been. Before this year, they had one designated player, I believe. And people can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just basing it off of what the Wikipedia said. The year before that, one designated player. How about the year before that? One designated player. In my opinion, the solution to this, it's a very simple one. Break out the checkbook because these fans deserve better.
That is some really good research and data there, friend. Once again, I see
Good.
I'm influencing you. I can see that. That's fantastic. Great
I'm not
point.
giving you the credit for that one.
Yeah, you
No,
are.
no,
Thanks for deciding to come back.
I didn't go. You went to a black screen on my screen.
My thing crashed then, but we're still recording, so we'll have to cut all this out. You're
It
con-
stopped for a second and then it started again. But yeah, I'll cut it all out.
yeah, I'll cut it. I might cut it out. We'll see. Um, all really good points. Very similar to something I'm talking about. You know, they don't spend, and again, and as I mentioned, you can get away with that for a little bit, but
I think you I think you can get away with it in the past. MLS 2.0, 3.0, and I know we've definitely talked about that. I don't think in new age MLS you get away with that anymore. You cannot not spend unless you're gonna do an FC Dallas and just have the best academy in the league, which they don't. So time to break out the checkbook.
correct, or get a new owner, right? Somebody who will do
That
it.
too. Yeah.
My next point is relatively similar. Underperforming players and key injuries. They came into the season hoping that certain players would step up, and they simply did not fit the bill. Darren Yappy was one of those guys. They didn't bring in any striker help, expecting Darren Yappy to carry that load. He was okay, not great. He was all right. Showed promise, but never really broke out. Kevin Cabral on a DP contract could not find the form he was expected to. Max had his own issues that we'll talk about. Gerbosh, Ronan, Maxo were left to try and carry the load. And those guys weren't even like spectacular either. They were just okay. In football, you can carry one underperforming player, sometimes two in a group of 11 when you play a game. But once three players are underperforming, you're asking for trouble. When the majority of your team is not to the level that you need it to be at, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, which is what Colorado did. You combine that with a season-ending injury to one of the best tempo-setting number 8s in the league in Jack Price, and you're asking for a bad time. You can always see that as soon as Jack Price goes out, because he's been injured long term, like once or twice, and it pretty much directly correlates to their success or failure, right? Um, so that was a big hitter for them as well, I believe.
Nice. My next point, scoring. In 2022, this team relied on two players to score more than half of their goals. One of those players is Giassi Zardes, who is no longer with the team. The other, Diego Rubio, only played 1,000 minutes this season, mainly because of injuries. So going into the season, what did the team do to bolster the attack? They brought in Kevin Cabral on a DP deal. What did this get them in return? Somehow an attack even worse than Toronto, at least as of the day of this recording, that has scored 25 goals so far this season. Now, Colorado still has 2 games to play, so they can get this up potentially a bit higher. But if they were to not score in the last 2 games, this would be the lowest amount of goals scored since 2013 DC United. That is 10
Wow.
that is 10 years ago for those of you losing track of time like me. So, what's the solution? I think in some part it goes hand in hand with the previous point that I was talking about. I think you definitely need to go and get another game-changing designated player in the attacking mid or the winger spot, someone who can support Rafael Navarro, and then give Navarro some more time in an offseason to kind of learn the system, learn the league, and come into next year and start looking like the player that I'm sure many of us were expecting him to look like. Because it's been a slow half year so far for him. But, he needs some time, but definitely give him some time. And I think get him some help because he's not going to be able to score all the goals on his own.
Yeah. One of my last talking points here is something I alluded to earlier in problems off the pitch. A common theme that we seem to be talking about today and on Monday is outside of football distractions, right? Early last season, Colorado signs 20-year-old Brazilian attacking midfielder named Max Alves to pull the strings and create more chances for Lewis, Rubio, Yapi, Barrios when he was still there. He didn't get up to speed right away, but this year I think they were expecting a lot out of him, and he could have been a game changer for them. He made 12 appearances for Colorado to start the year, in which Colorado only lost 3 times. They picked up 12 points and 2 U.S. Open Cup wins. Then a report comes out that says a player from Colorado's team was removed from training activities amongst investigation into unlawful sports gambling. Per Colorado and MLS, they both came out with this statement. Reports later come out that the Brazilian football had undergone a run of match-fixing events in their top flight, which tied back to 15 people, including 6 current pro players, one of which was Colorado's attacking midfielder, Max Alves. From the time that announcement was made, the very next run of games, all the way to the end of the season, Colorado would win just 3 more games. They'd go on an 11-game winless run, and they would go on to be one of the worst teams in the league by having all of these distractions go on. When you have to worry about all this nonsense off the pitch, it affects the performances on it. We've talked about that before. We'll talk about it again. Colorado are a great example of this, and they paid the price for it in 2023.
Nice. I'm sure you're gonna be excited about this last one for me. It's a topic near and dear to your heart.
Is it my boy WY?
It might be.
Yeah.
I'm talking about goalkeeping. So I personally think that the Colorado defense is pretty solid, and I think it's been solid for a few years now. But I think one area in the defense that they can improve upon is goalkeeping. So currently, the squad consists of Andrew's favorite goalkeeper in the league, William Yarbrough, and Marco Illich. The latter they brought in at the start of the season. So the question is, why did they go get a new goalkeeper? You might be asking.
No,
I mean,
the question.
Andrew's not asking that question because he hates William Yarbrough.
No, the question is, give me the PSXG plus minus. That's
Oh,
all I
it's
need
in
to
there.
hear.
Don't worry.
I know it's
coming.
here. Hit me with it.
It's coming. It's coming. Give it some time. So you might be asking, why did they bring in another goalkeeper? Why didn't they stick with William Yarbrough? And this may not necessarily be the reason, but I mean, this is what I'm going to run with. And that's because Yarbrough was statistically one of the worst goalkeepers in the league last season. So to give him some competition, I think they brought in another goalkeeper, and I credit to them for doing so. I'm glad that they didn't stick with Yarbrough and just leave it at being mediocre at best. So Yarbrough began the season as the starter, eventually was displaced by Illich around game week 16. Yarbrough in the season was much improved on the previous year, but was still only around league average in terms of our favorite stat, PSXG plus minus. Illich, who has been the starter for a number of weeks now, has been awful. In 12 games played, he has an almost worse PSXG plus minus at minus 4.4 than Yarbrough had the entire season prior at minus 4.8. He's the lowest save percentage in the league out of anyone who has played 1,000 minutes and has 2 clean sheets in 12 games, which honestly I think is a testament to the defense. So, how do you solve this issue? I think you give Illich a bit more time to turn it around. Not everyone's going to come in blazing. He's only played 12 games. It may take an offseason to figure it out. But I think you got to bring in another goalkeeper that's not Yarbrough to compete for that spot in case Illich does not get up to speed.
I think they just call up Tim Howard. Come
Bring
on
him out
back,
of
Timmy.
retirement.
Come on back, Timmy. Yeah, I mean, listen, there were a ton of things that went into Colorado being as bad as they were. I think it all ties back to the one thing we kind of had in common, and it's lack of investment in the squad. And it's not 1 year of lack of investment either. It's multiple years of not having enough year after year after year when other teams are continually getting better and you are just staying at this bottom flat line, that's an issue, right? So um, it will be very interesting because the Kroenke family has mentioned that they are going to invest more in players in the next upcoming window. So it'll be interesting to see for sure. A team that's going to have a lot more fun in the transfer window next season, LA Galaxy, because their ban is over. And that's actually what I want to talk about first for the LA Galaxy is this transfer ban. Much like Inter Miami, the Galaxy were faced with a transfer ban in the middle of the season where they were not allowed to sign any players who required an international visa. They were also stuck trying to deal with the loss of $1 million in GAM to a roster that was already bogged down with bad contracts and DP signings. At the time of the ban, all three U22 and all three DP slots were filled with underperforming players or injured players, to my knowledge. Meaning that there wasn't a lot they could do outside of getting some free agents and stuff, which were few and far between at the middle of the MLS season, right? This would come back to hurt them in the long run, as injuries forced them to make signings that were okay at best to try and turn around what was an awful start um, from this group.
Yeah, I think I kind of touch on that point throughout my couple of points that I have here. I don't think I have one specifically for it, but definitely the penalties certainly had some impact on this. My first point, I think it's an obvious one, but injuries. I mean, injuries have decimated this team this year. A team that should be better than where they currently are in the standings. I think key long term injuries to guys like Chicharito, Gaston Brugman, and Jalen Neal have killed the momentum of this team, and I think in turn pretty much killed their season. And I mean, solution wise, it's basically the same thing as Miami. You just got to give them some time to recover and come back and get back integrated into the team again, and then let them all cook with Ricky Puig. I don't. Yeah, so I think with no more transfer penalties going into this offseason, I think that'll be a big window for them to kind of fill in the holes that they need and let the guys come back from injury and then give it a good run again next season. But I think the pieces are there. I think they just need some time to get healthy.
Funnily enough, that's my second point is the injury train. Like Toronto, the Galaxy suffered their fair share of injuries as well to key players, right? Chicharito missing 20 games with his knee injury. Martin Cáceres, 17 games with a knee injury. Gaston Brugman, one of my favorite players in the league, watching him play is like watching art. 11 games. Caligari, who you don't even know,
I do
as
know him.
evident, as evident,
I know him now.
as evident from Fun Game Friday. Uh, 6 games and Jalen Neal 5 games, all to end the year. So there were players who were hurt inside that as well that I haven't mentioned. When you're trying to turn around a bad start, having key players, including a top 10 center mid and a top 10 striker, out to long term injuries, as well as two of your more promising young players, it doesn't help your cause. So injuries definitely brought this team down, and the transfer ban not being able to replace them properly with players that they would have wanted to use also hurt them.
Nice. So I apologize ahead of time. My notes on this next one are a bit long, but I think the next point for me was depth. So I think this goes hand in hand a bit with the injuries. But the team had to rely on a lot of backups this season in some key positions to step up if they were still going to be competitive. And unfortunately for the Galaxy fans, they have not been able to do so. So center back was one position that I look at in terms of lack of depth, where after Jalen Neal, I just don't think there was much there. Cáceres was also hurt around the same time, as you mentioned. And I think that left Zavaleta as like really the only true center back backup to pair with Chris Mavinga. So looking through some of their previous games, it looked like this meant that they were forced into situations where they were playing Kelvin Leardom and Caligari as center backs along with Chris Mavinga. And in MLS 4.0, I don't think that's good enough. That you're not going to be able to sustain a good defense when attacks are just looking more and more lethal every year. When you're playing guys out of position and you're not playing the best that you can. I mean, obviously, the Galaxy were kind of put into a corner when guys get injured. They can't exactly predict that. But um, in the middle of the season, despite the transfer ban for international players, they did go out and land a few more center backs during the summer window. Uh, but I still feel like they haven't been able to fill that Jalen Neal sized hole in the defense. And in addition to that, I feel like there also hasn't been a true replacement for the loss of Gaston Brugman, who is, by some people's opinion, and I would say I would agree with that opinion, is the best defensive mid in the league. They brought in Edwin Cerrillo during the summer window, but I don't think he's been able to replace what Bergman brought to the table, and that's no easy task. So, not a knock against Edwin Cerrillo. And then lastly, Chicharito, Dejan Jovalic, I feel like should have been the perfect replacement based on how successful he had been in the past with limited minutes, but he's really struggled when given the opportunity this year. At the moment, he's on 5 goals, 2 assists in about 1,500 minutes. I think a healthy Chicharito paired with Ricky Puig, I think would hit 10 goals at least comfortably. So Jovalic only being at half of that is a bit disappointing. Billy Sharp, I think, has done a really nice job coming in and filling this role, but it was a little too late in the season to have, I think, enough of an impact. So I guess solution wise for this, obviously, no more transfer restrictions in the next window will help them a lot to be able to better set the team up for in case this were to happen again. Obviously, you're not going to hope it happens again, but now you can kind of get a sense of like, all right, if there were to be some key injuries to key players, where are the holes in our team? Like, where should we make sure that we have the depth in case there is an injury like this again?
I, funnily enough, have something very similar. I only focused on one section there, and
Copying my notes.
it is I let you do this. You're welcome. Make you look. Um, I focused on the center backs alone, right? So yes, the injuries hurt, the depth wasn't there because of the transfer ban, but the really, really bad part to me was at the center back spot. We talked about it from day one that the roster build and how they wanted to run their team made no sense because you had two players under 30 to play center back, and one of them was going out on loan. So you had Jalen Neal, who had made an appearance for the national team before he made an appearance for LA, paired with either Chris Mavinga, Eric Zavaleta, Martin Castros. All guys who have great experience when they were a lot younger, but it wasn't to be to start the year. And then midseason rolls around and your reinforcements are 30-year-old Tony Alfaro, who is a starting center back for the worst defensive team in league history, and 34-year-old Maya Yoshida. This isn't 1.0 MLS. Attackers are quick, they're agile, they're smart. These guys are okay if you have them in like one or two players in a spurt for a team, like Chiellini, for example, in LAFC, surrounded by a lot better, younger, I won't say better, but younger, more athletic guys where he can just direct and use his experience is fine. But to have an entire back line surrounded by one guy who can do it, not great. So they were responsible for shipping the most goals through the entire league this year. Surefire way to get yourself right out of the playoffs. And the reason why is because they didn't do their job building their team correctly. And it started at the center.
I'm going to steal your word here. Funnily enough, my last point pretty much right on the same wavelength here. It was about the defense. I mean, I think it's an obvious point. It seems obvious that we would both cover it. They are the worst defensive team in the league. And to the exact point you made, even at the start of the season, just looking at the roster that they had put together in the defense, it did not make us feel great about them defensively. Um, I think in some part, the defense has been hurt a little bit by injuries, certainly to Jalen Neal. And I think a couple of the fullbacks have been on and off with injuries as well. But as I mentioned before, even going into the start of the season, the roster didn't look great defensively. Uh, at the start of the year, the roster it's at center back specifically consisted of Jalen Neal, who had a lot of potential but had yet to play professional minutes yet, so unproven at that point. Chris Mavinga, who was coming off a brutal year with Toronto, very much past his peak, Martin Caceres, and Eric Zavaleta. That's not great center back depth. And it was made all the worse when Jalen Neal had gotten hurt. And I think they have good young fullbacks, just to kind of round out the rest of the defense in Caligari and Julian Ade. But I don't think either of them seem to be outright defensive fullbacks. So pair that with the center back that they had, plus no Gaston Brugman, who they lost through injury. And it was going to be a recipe for disaster defensively. Honestly, in terms of a solution, I think they need to improve the center back position. I think they need to find another rock at center back to pair with Jalen Neal. Maybe that's Maya Yoshida. I'm not too sure yet. I'd like to see like a full year from him first. And then I think you got to redo the depth with some new options, especially at center back. Because I just think, to the exact point that you had mentioned before, the attacks are not the same as MLS 1.0, 2.0 anymore. They're quick, they're dynamic, and you're going to need strong defenders in order to be able to handle it. And I don't think that they have that at the moment.
Correct. Yeah. If you look at it, right, their roster build was poor. Injuries hit them like a truck. And then the transfer ban prevented them from fixing it. And now they are where they are. So, again, hopefully they'll learn from that, build it properly, build it legally, and then get a medical guy who won't get their entire team hurt. One last team to go for. I don't really have a clever transition because I did, but it's not my first point, so I can't transition right into it. We're just going to jump over to Austin FC, a team that one of our hosts, definitely not me, predicted to win the entire West at one point, as well as giving plaudits to basically every player in their back line, saying that they were going to be world beaters. And I believe that was all Connor. Is that about right? You remember it that way?
I may or may not have had Austin first. I'm actually checking now because I feel like I might have had them first.
I think we both did, if I'm going to be honest with you.
I don't remember praising the back line, but I do remember you cursing.
No, that was you. You said
No,
Kid
no, no.
Keller was going to be top 10.
You cursed Keller's entire career.
All right. While you do that, I'm going to talk about the fact that they're in this, what I call a third year slump. The first year, it was expected they were going to struggle a little bit. They did. Year two, they lit it up. And they seemed to have stepped it up even further in the offseason. And it never got quite to the level that they expected. Part of me believes that the high of being so good so early died off and they just came straight back down to earth. Druisi went from 25 goals in 2022 to 13, which makes way more sense. Fagundes went from 7 and 13 to 3 and 1 before being shipped to LA, which is right about where his numbers have been the last few years, if not like a touch below. To me, if this team doesn't overachieve, because I think we can all agree they overachieved in their second year, if they don't overachieve in 2022, I don't think anybody's freaking out about this side finishing the season in contention for the playoffs until the second to last week. But they rode that high through 2022 and finally just came back down to earth in 23. They've got some key points to address in the offseason, but I think just the, oh my God, we're so good, we're so good, we're so good has finally worn off. And now they're like, okay, we actually have some holes we need to fill.
Yeah, I think a nice middle ground would be good for them because I mean, I don't think that their roster is as bad as they looked this season, but I definitely think, to your point, they overplayed in 2022. So probably a middle ground is a good, I would say, pretty accurate areas where the team is at the moment. My first point for them is about their defense. They have conceded 54 goals so far this season, which I believe is the third worst in the Western Conference. So, I mean, just flat out, this team was not good enough defensively to make it to the playoffs. Are there teams with worse defensive records that are currently in the playoffs? Yes. However, they didn't have enough of attack to make up for their poor defense. And that's not me saying that I think their attack is poor, uh, because it was very much not. They scored tons of goals this year, not as many as last year, but plenty enough that they should have been in the playoff picture with a solid defense. Um, Cascante and Vicenen were just not good enough in the defensive metrics. And while Hedges would have been another good option at center back, he barely played for Austin with less than 300 minutes. Add to that their fullbacks were mainly Nick Lima, who is historically and currently an attacking fullback, not a defensive one, and John Gallagher, who is a winger made fullback. There was just not enough of a defensive presence in his team to keep them from conceding 54 goals in the season. In my opinion, I think a solution that could maybe work for them is maybe a 5 at the back. And I think that would allow Lima and Gallagher to venture forward with less defensive responsibility. Looking at transfer market, they mostly played a 4-3-3 this season. So I think maybe a 5 at the back could be a good opportunity for them to allow the attacking fullbacks to go forward and not leave holes in the defense. And this could even include Julio Cascante, who had great attacking numbers this season and was a great attacking threat. If he wanted to venture forward, it would still leave Hedges and Vicenen in the defense, with Johan Valencia as well to help in defensive support. So I think that can maybe be a way for them to still utilize a good attack while minimizing the defensive holes.
Tell them what you want, Grace. Tell them what you think. Hold on,
Grace, what's your point number one?
whisper it in my ear. Okay, tell him. Did you hear that? She said, funnily enough, point number 2 is defensive nightmares. So as I mentioned, I'm blaming Connor on this one for putting the curse of Austin FC on both the team and the individual players. But from day one, Austin FC's defensive issues were on full display. The loss of Gabrielson last year was way more of a hit than most people realized it was going to be. And they thought that they replaced it with Vicenen, but boy, were they off. The pairing of Vicenen and Cascante was usually the main pairing, and they were, as you mentioned, they weren't good enough. But they did flip in 4 other center backs throughout the year, all who had their own issues. Even though Kip Keller was predicted by Connor to have a breakout year and be a top 10 center back in the league, he was not ready to get big time minutes. Amro Tarek played 66 minutes, scored a brilliant own goal, and was sent packing. Matt Hedges slid in at the end of the year and was mid. I mean, did you know that Alexander Radonovich was even in the team? I didn't. And then Brandon Craig on loan, no appearances. Like they couldn't figure it out in the back. We mentioned it on Monday that picking and placing pieces, trying to figure out your best 11 and shapes and all that stuff. If you don't get it down pat by like the first third of the year, you're looking for trouble. They have conceded the 3rd most goals in the Western Conference. And as we mentioned with LA, ask anybody who has defensive trouble. That is a surefire way to find yourself on the outside looking into the playoff picture.
Nice. Maybe you'll take my point after I mention this one too. You could hit us with another funneling. But my point number 2 is their lack of striker this season. Sebastian Driussi has proven that he can ball out in this league. And this season was a step back for him. But he still had a very respectable 15 goal contributions. I think he did not get enough help from the other attackers around him, namely Giassi Zardes. Now the teams have found a way to contain Driussi much better than they did in 2022. He needs someone else to help take more of the attention from the defense, in my opinion. And I think a big-time striker can do that. I think this will open up more space for Driussi, and it will also help Ethan Finley and Emiliano Rigoni get more space as well. But Zardes' 6 goals in 1,500 minutes, I think, was not garnering enough attention from defenses and allowed them to focus more on stopping Sebastian Driussi. In my opinion, a solution that could work for them maybe is to get Alex Ring off of a designated player contract and go find a striker with that designated player spot. I think this will return Austin's attack to where it was. Well, it'll put it more in the direction of where it was in 2022. And like I mentioned with the last point, I don't think the attack was bad this season. But if they're going to leak goals like they did, then they're going to need to have an explosive attack similar to like what Atlanta or Columbus have brought this season. While conceding lots of goals, they've scored way more. So I think bringing in a big time striker would help with that a lot.
Funnily enough, that
No,
isn't
you're lying on that one.
that
I
is
don't believe you.
not my third point.
Yeah.
My third point is a team that lacked confidence. And I'll explain it a little bit here. Teams that have experience in big games know how to stop skids, make bad situations manageable, prevent themselves from falling into slumps, and can turn things around relatively quickly before it becomes an actual problem. Austin FC are not a team with a ton of experience. We know this because they've only been around for 3 years, and it showed. So I'll start with CCL. They make the CONCACAF Champions League in their first or their second season, and it was just purely miserable. They played a Haitian team called Violette, who on their own were not awful, but playing at a neutral site because of I can't even remember the reason why, but it was either the stadium was broken or they were kicked out or something along those lines. They play at an awful neutral site where the biggest thing I remember is a massive freaking tree behind the. Did you watch that game?
I'm trying to like remember what I saw from the highlights of it.
So you start looking like towards the left hand side of the goal, and it pans. You see stadiums and fans and bleachers, and all of a sudden it all stops, and the other end, right behind the goal, is a massive freaking tree, like huge. It like over the shadow goes onto the stadium type of huge, and it's like, where are these guys playing? And they got killed 3-0. Amro Tarek scored his aforementioned own golazo, and they were just shell shocked heading into the round of 16 second leg. But that's okay because they have the next leg at home where they were so dominant the season before. And Violette couldn't travel with most of their squad due to visa issues. So they signed semi pro players to make up the numbers on the bench. Austin was only able to score 2 goals and got knocked out on aggregate. Purely embarrassing, really. I can see you're looking things up in your glasses. Your reflection is popping out.
I'm trying to find the
I
highlights
hope
so
you
that I
can
can see the
find it.
big
I'll
tree.
send you the. I have it somewhere, so I'll send it to you if we can't find it.
Don't worry,
Um,
I will find the big tree.
then we go to Leagues Cup. Leagues Cup was a chance for them to turn it around and push for the top 4 in the West because at the time they were right in the thick of things. They could have gone and gone on a run here. They were drawn with 2 Mexican sides who were perennial bottom dwellers in their league, of which Austin was expected to come out on top, smooth as can be, straight into the knockout rounds. They lost both games relatively embarrassingly, if I remember correctly, and they were bounced before they can even get to the round of 32. And then there was the end of the year run. As soon as Leagues Cup was over, they had, a 2-3 week break, and they went back to MLS play, where they were a straight up shell of themselves. They had 1 win in 10 games since the embarrassing Leagues Cup run, and the only win came against fellow playoff eliminees, DC United. They had a bunch of embarrassing results, including 6-3 drubbing against St. Louis and a 4-2 loss to LAFC. Austin FC went from rough to bad to worse this season. They snowballed into a hot mess to end the season, and because of it, they are not going to be in the 2023 playoffs.
Funnily enough, took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah, right.
Also, I see the big tree.
Yeah,
No, but I am serious. My last point was bad losses, and it's almost essentially exactly like you were talking about. Um, I think this summed up their season very well. And throughout this entire year, they had multiple very bad losses to teams that they should be beating. And exactly like you were talking about, I think the most notable one, of course, is that of losing to the Haitian side, Violette AC in CCL. who were able to complete one of the biggest CCL upsets in history. And this was only, you don't have to show me the picture. I saw
Big
it in the eye.
tree.
I saw the big tree.
Look at the big tree.
You're interrupting my last point. So when they had lost in CCL, this was only a few weeks after they had gifted 3 points to the new boys, St. Louis City, in the opening game of the season, which I'm sure we all very much remember. That was massive. I mean, I'm assuming a lot of people were watching as well because that was the start of Apple TV. So not great. And then later on in the season, as you had talked about as well, they lost to FC Juarez and Mazatlan in the League's Cup. Both teams that Austin should be beating. They are better than both of those teams, and yet I believe they lost both games 3-1. And I'm sure that these losses have to take a toll on the team's morale. And I think having those losses throughout the year just kept the morale at a low point for them. And honestly, in terms of a solution, I mean, the obvious one is like just don't lose those games next year, right? But I guess a more practical solution could be having a strong locker room leader, maybe somebody like Matt Hedges, who could just kind of help keep the morale of the team higher. And if and or when they suffer bad losses, they have somebody who has some experience in being able to get past that and not get the team in a rut.
Wow. So you just copied me basically every time I wanted to say something. That's pretty cool.
It's almost like it's pretty obvious, I guess, how each team failed in the season.
Sure. And a little bit, the big things stood out. Like there were, again, with LA and with Austin, there were other things that happened. We're not saying that this is the only three things like that knocked them out. Obviously, there were other things that went on. However, these were the three big ones that stood out as like, hey, if I'm gonna go in as a GM and be like, I need to fix three things, that's how you do it. So, um, yeah, great work. Way to be on the same page. Please let us know what you think about our thoughts. What else are we missing? What do you think anything is bigger than the three that we've brought out here? Let us know in the comments below or write us an email. Make sure you're following us wherever you get your podcasts. So, next time we go live, we might do some history. We might do some top tens. We might come back and do more teams that have been knocked out, depending on if Charlotte gets a result against Miami. Because if they don't, I think they're out. Make sure you're following us wherever you get your social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. So you can see all of our clips. You can interact with us, look at all of our comments and things like that. Because we'd love to do that. And I think that's all I got. You got anything else?
Nope, that's it.
All righty. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players Podcast. See ya.